Should expectations be tempered for George Kittle if Deebo Samuel returns this week? That and much more coming up on tonight's episode of the Footballguys Mailbag Show. Victoria, go ahead and start us off here. Should we be tempering expectations for Kittle after that monster performance last week if Deebo Samuel is back in the lineup this week?
Yes and no, right? Of course, if he's coming back, you assume automatically, well, there's going to be less targets to go around. I'll start with this. First off, last week, against Seattle, Kittle exploded. Seattle's the 7th easiest matchup for tight ends from weeks 8 through 12 before Kittle walked in the building and set it on fire. So A, it was a fantastic matchup for Kittle. B, with Deebo with Deebo out, of course they're going to lean on their next most talented pass catcher. Obviously, it worked. It was surprising Ayuk didn't see more targets, but tough to force it to him if Kittle's just smashing, right? The only thing I'll say is Deebo only had 1 reception in each of his last 2 games. So instead, he saw a majority of his fantasy production coming on the ground. With San Fran having all of their best running backs banged up, he had to step up and take the majority of the carries. So we might see the same thing happen again, at least for this week. We know Elijah Mitchell's in concussion protocol. Jeff Wilson's banged up. I think he had a limited practice today. JaMychal Hasty's the only healthy running back on the roster. So I could see Deebo coming back, continuing to see more work on the ground. So I'm not worrying about Kittle at all. I'm certainly not expecting another 40 burger this week, but not too worried.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we've seen it over the last few weeks where Deebo has been taking more and more touches out of the backfield because of all of the injuries. And now this week, this might be the most injured this core has been throughout the entire season. The only person right now with a clean bill of health is JaMychal Hasty. So definitely want to pick him up on your fantasy football waivers if he is still available. But Troy, do you have anything to add to this? I mean, are you tempering expectations, or do you think that Kittle is just going to keep doing what he's been doing these last 5 weeks, regardless of whether Deebo Samuel is healthy or not?
Well, it's not going to be like last week. So you got 12 targets last week. It's not going to happen again. The last really good game he had. So he's been scoring touchdowns. That's one good thing about George Kittle. So he's been producing even with Deebo in the lineup. So he's still going to be fine, but he's just not going to have a monster. He most likely isn't going to have another monster performance like he did last week, right? Like his next best game outside of last week was in week 9 against Arizona. He saw 8 targets and 101 yards, and he scored. So he can definitely still put up big days. It's just if Deebo's back in the lineup, we know they want to get the ball in his hands, and rightfully so. But again, it doesn't matter. George Kittle's still one of the best tight ends in the league. You're going to start him. You're going to be just fine, even if he doesn't have a game like last week.
Right. And with George Kittle, it seemed like previously over the years, his touchdowns always came on huge chunk plays where, he'd be breaking off a 30, 40-yard touchdown. And what we've seen this year is them making a focus to get the ball to him in the red zone at the goal line. They're drawing up plays to get him in space in the end zone. So if you are rostering George Kittle, you've got a lot to be excited about right now. He is 100% healthy. He is in his physical prime. Coaching staff loves him. He's getting more targets than ever. He's getting those red zone touches. So you got to be happy right now if you are a George Kittle manager. But anyway, I want to thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Footballguys Mailbag Show. Here we are now heading into week 14. We got week 14, 15, 16, and then Fantasy Football Championship in week 17. It is coming up really quickly. So we're going to do our best to make sure that you are prepared for this must-win week in fantasy football. Just a reminder that you can send any questions you have to mailbag@footballguys.com. And Troy, Victoria, and myself will go over those in the first half of the show. In the second half of the show, we will go to the chat, answer all of your questions live. So if you got any start-sit questions, trade questions, anything like that, drop them in the chat now, and we will get to them in just a little bit. We bring the show to you live every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/footballguys to see this show, the Audible, DFS Power Grid, and every other show that the Football Guys team has to offer. Now, before we get into it, why don't one of you tell everybody in the audience a little bit about our partners over at FanUp?
I got this, y'all. Hey, what's up, everybody? If you love fantasy football, then listen up. You have to join this NFL season's hottest and easiest daily contest. You can flex on the competition in FanUp's daily flex ball contest to win cash in the hottest brand prizes. It combines the best of redraft and best ball formats. There's no salary cap, drafts, waivers. FanUp allows you to pick a new team daily and stack your roster however you like. You can take on your friends every week, so sign up right now. Enter before the Thursday night games, Sunday games, and Monday night football each week to win FanUp bonus prizes from Fanatics. Download the FanUp app now in Apple app stores or go to fanup.app. Just be fans.
Thank you very much for that, Troy. Now let's go ahead and get right in. The next question that we've got comes in from Tyler Johnson, and Tyler is asking us, what is a strategy that you are implementing right now if you are in the playoffs? Well, if you've been watching the show and if you are a Football Guys subscriber using all of their tools, of course you've already locked in your playoff spot. So what is the next step? We're going to help you out right now. Troy, start us off. If you've locked in a playoff spot, what is something that you are consciously doing right now to prep for that championship run?
Sure. So I won't take all, I think some of us have similar. I think all of us have similar. So I'll just take one of them. I'll say backup running backs. You want to start piling up backup running backs because you don't need depth in the playoffs. You just need starters and potential upside in case somebody gets hurt. So look at people like Samaje Perine or Khalil Herbert or someone like that. Stash them on your bench and you'll be good to go.
Yep. I mean, that's probably the best thing you can do right now is locking in those spots. But Victoria, what other advice do you have for any managers that are lucky enough to have already secured a fantasy football playoff spot?
I love that advice, though, Troy. I want to start off with that. Last week on the show, we talked about getting defenses for your fantasy playoffs, and we talked about a couple of defenses that we liked. We could probably get off of waivers who have good matchups approaching, so head back to our last week's episode to check that out. We were talking about it today. I was debating with Dave and Troy, do I pick up Green Bay or Kansas City for this stretch run? I like their matchups there, but why not pick up both if you don't want to see one of your opponents having Green Bay or Kansas City play them against you in the playoffs? I'm okay with having a couple of defenses on my bench just to be prepared. And if one has a better matchup than the other in the fantasy playoffs, I'm fine doing that. Because as Troy said, you don't need the depth. You just need the starters.
Yeah, and I think both of you covered, the two main things that you should be doing right now, so I won't go too deeply into that. But this is something we talked about today, and I believe we talked about this on the show last week, but I just want to bring it up again. The Football Guys Strength of Schedule tool is fantastic if you are trying to map out your route to the playoffs right now. What they do is they break down every single team on a row going vertically and or horizontally. And what you can do is look at their matchups week to week. You see what their opponent is, and then it shows you the differential that the teams are scoring on average against that. So you can kind of just look at the defense that you may already have, see when they've got tough matchups coming up, and then try to find on the vertical columns there some good, symbiotic relationships so you can pair two defenses together. So that's great. I also just want to call this out. I tweeted about this earlier today that, this is the time of year where like Troy was saying, you don't need backup quarterbacks. You don't need backup tight ends. Realistically, I don't even like to have more than one or two backup wide receivers. You got to be confident in the guys that you have. But this is when you get those high upside running backs because, they can end up, first of all, running backs get injured. So if your running back gets injured, hopefully you can elevate one of those guys due to another injury. But also, let's say you've got Alexander Madison, one of those guys that's really going to be a very valuable backup running back. You'd probably rather them be on your lineup or on your bench than in your opponent's lineup. So it almost becomes a little bit defensive at this point. But I tweeted this that, you want to make sure and you go out and get all the backup running backs you can. And somebody responded, Nate Lane here, with a picture of his bench in his league. Let me just read this to you really quickly. This is his bench. Darrell Williams, Mark Ingram, A.J. Dillon, Miles Sanders, Ronald Jones, Amir Abdullah, Samaje Perine, Devontae Booker, Jermichael Hasty. I mean, that's how you do it right there. That guy has every single high-end handcuff you could possibly have stashed on his team. That's how you do it. So, take Nate Lane's advice here. Go out and get all the handcuffs you can and prep for that playoff run. Next question we got comes in from our friend Nick at Play to Win Fantasy, and Nick is asking us 4 down weeks in a row for DK Metcalf. He gets a good matchup this week against Houston. Any hesitation playing him in the playoffs? This is what we opened our show with last week, and then DK Metcalf went out and laid another dud. So, Victoria, help us out. Are you starting DK this week, or are you thinking about maybe benching him?
Goodness. I mean, I definitely have some hesitation, especially with the way Russ has been playing. We, like you said, we talked about this last week. We can't really be benching DK Metcalf right now with the way he could explode on one play. But let me ask you guys this big question incoming: is DK Metcalf equivalent to a Mike Williams right now? Honestly, like, not a clue what kind of game is he gonna have. He has a super low floor. He could boom at any time, and it pains me to talk about them two in the same sentence, considering you drafted one in the top 10 wide receivers and the other maybe outside the top 50 wide receivers in Mike Williams. So, and it's worth noting that, I mean, DK has a fine matchup this week. If Russ can't do it this week for him, then I would be terrified to play DK or any other Seattle pass catcher in the playoffs. But he's got the Rams coming up with Jalen Ramsey likely. Well, actually, did Ramsey get hurt? Actually, now that I think about that, Ramsey might be out or might be hurt. I feel like I saw a report of that. But then he's got Chicago and Detroit, which are okay matchups, but got to see what he does this week.
Yeah, and once again, I mean, Lockett is the preferred guy here. I mean, this is what we saw last year, and DK Metcalf, he gets the big shots. But something that really blew my mind was looking at his splits with and without Russell Wilson. DK Metcalf is getting more targets per game with Russell Wilson, but his catch rate is lower, his yardage output per game is lower, his touchdown rate is lower. So even though he's getting more opportunity with what is presumed to be a better quarterback, it just isn't translating into fantasy points right now. So, Troy, is there any chance you're benching DK Metcalf, or is that just getting way, way, way too cute with it this time of year?
I'm absolutely not benching DK because, again, it was already addressed that he's has too much upside to leave on your bench, and he can have a boom game. The problem with DK these past couple of weeks is that he hasn't scored. He hasn't scored since week 8, where he had 2 touchdowns, and he had a bye in week 9. So I think that's a huge thing that we're not used to. We're used to him finding the end zone. Another thing that was mentioned is his yardage. Like last week, he had 60 yards, but outside of that, he hasn't topped over 50 yards since week 7 outside of last week.
Ugh.
But he is getting over the past 4 weeks, though, he's seen 8 targets 3 out of the 4 times. Week 12 was horrible. He only saw 4 targets. So that was absolute garbage. But going forward, you have to play him because, again, like right now at the time, like, again, don't get too cute. Do you really feel confident playing some guy from waivers unless you had just like extreme depth on your bench, which most likely
Josh Palmer?
Yeah, like you're not playing Josh Palmer over DK, so just play DK.
You never know if Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are out this week.
Stop. Victoria, don't be leading our listeners down the wrong path.
I'm just kidding. Sorry, listeners.
Yeah, but it's tough. And I mean, this is very reminiscent of what we saw last year. I just kind of made the comparison just a few days ago. But last year, let me just read these splits to you. First half of the year, through the first 8 games, DK Metcalf was balling out. He was the wide receiver 2 with 8 total touchdowns in the first 8 games last year. In the last 8 games, he was the wide receiver 37 with 2 total touchdowns. And that's kind of what we saw this year too. You know, he was putting up elite wide receiver 1 numbers on the front half of the year, then hits that midway point and the Seahawks cool down, Russell Wilson cools down. That ends up translating into DK Metcalf's production. So is this something that's just like a pure fluke, or is this starting to become a trend? Because even before DK Metcalf was in Seattle, Russ would historically kind of slow down at the season's halfway point. Or are we just, reading too much into this?
I mean, it's similar again, like you said, like Russ always been known for this, but the problem is just like you don't really bench Russ. Like now you could probably play streamers over him, but in the past you would never bench Russell Wilson. And I feel like we're in the same position where you kind of like hamstrung the DK. And again, like he could have a down performance in the playoffs, but if he has a huge performance and he's on your bench, you're going to feel like an idiot and you're going to be out of the playoffs. So I'd rather him in my lineup. Yeah, I'd rather in my lineup and suck versus on my bench and blowing up.
So let me throw one more question out there about DK Metcalf before we move to the next question. And, just putting you guys on the spot here. I won't hold you accountable for this in a few months, but where do you think DK Metcalf is drafted in 2022? What round?
Victoria, you can go.
I honestly still think he's going to be drafted in the 2nd round. I do. Unless, I mean, usually recency bias kind of influences that July, August draft period. But the same thing happened last year as what's happening now. As you've already said, he had the down second half of the season, and he still was being drafted as a top 10 wide receiver. I just think that's ingrained in fantasy players' minds now, and I still think he'll be at least a second round player.
Interesting. I'm kind of expecting him. Well, Troy, I want to hear what are you still expecting him to be a second round pick, Troy, or do you think he slides a little bit heading into next year?
I don't see him falling out of the second round. I think the latest he goes is late second, but I agree. I think let's say second, the latest possible, early third, but even that I think might be a little far-fetched. All he had to do is if he has a big game this week, everyone's going to completely forget about his bad game. So it's like he'll be a second round pick.
And we're not saying we agree, Dave. We're not saying we agree with it. I don't have DK anywhere, to be honest with you.
Except for like best ball leagues, I don't have DK.
And I think that I think that plays a huge factor too. Like if he goes out, one of these last few weeks of the season and has 150-yard 2-touchdown DK Metcalf game, then I think he's going to stay firmly put in the second. But if this cold streak lasts through the end of the season, it wouldn't surprise me to see people start, like you said, making a comp to Mike Williams or some of these other really gifted athletes that just struggle with consistency. I promise you that stays on the show. I'm not going to, give you a hard time for this outside of the show, Victoria. But really, I mean, DK Metcalf, he's quite a head scratcher right now. And I think a lot of his value heading into next season is going to be contingent on how he closes out this season. All right. I'm exhausted with DK talk. We can move on to the next one here. This question comes in from our friend Kyle. Kyle, loyal listener to the show we see out there every single week. Really appreciate it. And Kyle's asking us, who is a low-owned wide receiver that you think can contribute in the playoffs? Which one of you has somebody ready to go?
I'm good. I'm ready to go. So
let's hear it, Troy.
My guy that I've been touting, and it could burn me, is Marquez Valdes-Scantling.
Whoa.
Right? So here, let me explain why. So look, it's a little bit gross, but hear me out, right? So the last two games, so week 11, he saw 10 targets, 123 yards, and he scored. Week 12, he saw 9 targets, only had 50 yards, but he was targeted in the end zone. He just didn't score. So, and then also he ran his most routes on the season last week. In week 12. So that just tells me that they're trying to get him involved, and I think he's stepping up more as that number 2 receiver. We've seen in the past how he pisses Aaron Rodgers off because he does make catches and he always does these weird MVS things. But clearly, it's telling me these past couple of weeks at least that they're trying to get him involved in the offense, and he's been a part of the offense. So this week he's going against Chicago. They give up a decent amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So to me, I'm like, look. And he's going to be a flex play, right? He's a high upside flex play. I'm not saying you could start him over some proven guys, but if you're in a multiple flex league or in a 3 wide receiver league, I think MVS is somebody you can pick up off waivers, put him in your lineup, and I think he could, again, he has that upside for you.
I don't hate that at all. And I think we're going to talk about MVS a little bit later in the show as well. But Victoria, who's somebody that you think could possibly contribute in the playoffs?
2 guys we also talked about in our group chat today, Dave, Russell Gage and KJ Osborn. I guess I'll start with Osborn. Again, these are dart throws, as Troy already said. They're low owned, and in a 10 to 12 redraft league, they might bring you some value. So starting with Osborn, obviously Adam Thielen, high ankle sprain. They haven't said how long he will be out. I'm guessing
3 to 5 weeks.
Yeah, okay. So 3 to 5 weeks, which is a long time with all of these games coming up. So Osborn has a huge opportunity in front of him. He's been productive this year when they needed him. So last week when Thielen went out, he went for four receptions, I think, for 47 yards and a touchdown. So I like him off waivers this week without Thielen. If Cook is back, it might limit his ceiling there, but he's a nice dart throw. I like Russell Gage more. I decided I know you guys helped push me there, but here we are. So sure, this week's matchup, Carolina, not a great matchup on paper, but Russell Gage is getting targeted. Last 3 games, 8 targets, 7 targets, 12 targets. He's the PPR wide receiver 8 over the last 3 weeks, which I was kind of shocked about. So I like him here for the fantasy playoffs.
Yep. Two names that I'll throw out there really quickly that were dropped in a lot of leagues: Julio Jones and Antonio Brown. Definitely check your waiver wire right now. We don't know exactly when or if Antonio Brown is going to come back after faking a vaccination card and all that drama. So I won't get too much into that, but Julio Jones is designated to return from IR and is back to practice this week, so he can play as early as this weekend. With AJ Brown out until at least week 16, he should step into that wide receiver one role. But there's one other name that I want to throw out there, another guy that has really dealt with injuries this year. Would you believe me if I told you that Sterling Shepard, in the 5 games that he has played this year, is on pace on a 16-game pace for 102 receptions and over 1,000 yards this year? I mean, Sterling Shepard.
That's a good one. I forgot about.
Yeah,
he was heavily targeted when he's in the lineup.
Yeah. Sterling Shepard was balling out early in the season. And, even with those games that I called out with him, being on pace for over 1,000 yards, out of those 5 games, he played less than 40% of the snaps in 2 of them because he was knocked out with an injury. When he was playing, he was, Daniel Jones's favorite target. In the 3 games that he was fully healthy and played more than 40% of the snaps, 9 targets, 10 targets, 14 targets. So I don't know if or when he is coming back, but if you are needy for wide receivers, he's a great guy to stash as well. All right, on to the next one.
You playing in with Jake Fromm this week?
It's so gross.
Giants fans, I'm so sorry.
Ooh,
I mean, you can make fun of me.
Watch he pulls a Mike White on us. He could pull a Mike White.
I knew it was coming.
Giants future franchise quarterback Jake Fromm.
Oh my gosh!
My goodness.
Right. I can't do this.
I saw a comment that said that from a Jets fan that was like, "We just need Mike White back, and we're gonna be on a tear." I'm like, "Oh boy."
Yeah, I mean, that whole situation was pretty wild. That it took the 2 veteran quarterbacks ahead of him, ahead of Zach Wilson, getting on the COVID list for Zach Wilson and get his job back. Things are a little weird in New York right now. I know Abe is watching the show right now live, as he does every week, a diehard Jets fan. So we won't dig into the Jets too hard here, but there I see him in the chat. But all right, next question comes from our friend Anon. Lil'Jordan Humphrey or somebody we just talked about, KJ Osborn. Who do you prefer for the rest of the season? Vic, start us off here. I feel like this one's kind of a no-brainer, but
yeah, for all the reasons I listed before, it's Osborn for me, especially with this potential hindrance of Taysom Hill's finger injury on his throwing hand. I just have a bad feeling relying on any Saints pass catcher right now. The floor is really low.
No, I'm just playing. I'm going KJ Osborn too.
Yeah. KJ Osborn for me as well. Lil'Jordan Humphrey, he's been fun. He's had a couple of splashes here and there, but KJ Osborn is going to step in as that wide receiver 2 for the next 3 to 5 weeks, and that's definitely who I would prefer for the rest of this very short season. Next question comes in from our friend Jorge Martin, and he is asking, how do you rate these wide receivers rest of season? Jaylen Waddle, Elijah Moore, T. Higgins, Brandin Cooks.
Love this.
I just want to say, based on the conversation, I mean, well, who wants – Troy, you start us off here. I think that there's kind of a clear-cut 2 and then a little bit of a break here. I think we're all going to have the same top 1 and 2 in some fashion.
I mean, I don't know. I thought so, but this is a tricky one, right? So you can make an argument for any of them. So Brandin Cooks is last on my list. I'll say that. Brandin Cooks is last. In terms of, honestly, you can mix up these 3 any which way. I'm trying not to sound so. Give me the guy who's, I think, second in the league right now receptions. Jaylen Waddle. 1. Number 2 is so tough for me, right? Because of recent production. They're both kind of similar. I'm going to go Elijah Moore than T. Higgins. So just like this ordered, that's how I'm going to go. Jaylen Waddle, Elijah Moore, T. Higgins, Brandin Cooks.
Victoria, you're nodding? Yeah.
I agree.
Mine is.
I have it the same way. And Jaylen Waddle, it's worth noting, Troy's right. I mean, Elijah Moore is the wide receiver 4 over the last, I think, since week 8. Waddle's wide receiver 8 overall. So Moore's been having more production. But I would take Waddle over Elijah Moore just because of how accurate 2 has been with the ball lately. And he's just a target hog. On average, 10 targets per game since week 8 for Waddle. Like, that's just nuts. And Elijah Moore, hats off to him. He's crushing it, but his production is more coming from scoring touchdowns, which has been incredible to watch. But I want to rely on the target share and not so much on the touchdowns.
I just want to. I think I might have misunderstood. Troy, did you say you had Elijah Moore ahead of T. Higgins?
I had Elijah Moore ahead of T. Higgins.
So I think that's the one switch that I'd make. I think I have Jaylen Waddle number 1, and then T. Higgins, then Elijah Moore, and then
it's so
tough.
Between Elijah Moore and T. Higgins, it's so tough because over the last 2 weeks, I think, was it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? T. Higgins, I think, is the wide receiver 1.
Yeah, well, I know
overall.
PFF has him ranked as the overall wide receiver 1 over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah,
the highest
exactly.
rated wide receiver per PFF.
Wow.
He's been balling out, as JJ Zachariason pointed out the other day as well. In games that T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are both healthy, T. Higgins is out targeting Jamar Chase. So, we saw Jamar Chase balling out to start the season, but a lot of that kind of came while T. Higgins wasn't at 100% or wasn't playing. So, I mean, we knew this was going to be a little bit of an issue in the offseason. Like last year, T. Higgins solidified himself as an alpha receiver. And then they went out and drafted Jamar Chase, another alpha receiver. And you put these two guys on one team, and it's like, how is it going to work out? And what we've seen is that, it was almost a better offense without him, as crazy as that sounds. I mean, when Jamar Chase was the guy, and now that they're both in there fighting for targets, it's kind of a weird situation. So, T. Higgins, I'd put him slightly ahead of Elijah Moore, but I think those two are really, really close as the second. I think the one thing we're all in agreement, though, is that Jaylen Waddle is a tier ahead of all these guys right now.
Agreed.
And the crazy thing with Waddle, too, is he hasn't been scoring a lot of touchdowns. Like, if he was just scoring like a league average touchdowns for the amount of catches that he's had, he would be up there as, the wide receiver 2 overall in fantasy. So if you're one of those guys that, gets big into numbers and expects some positive regression, Jaylen Waddle is a candidate for positive regression and should very likely end up catching some touchdowns down the stretch here.
A fun fact about Jaylen Waddle, right? So not this past week, but the week before when he scored, it was his first receiving touchdown in the USA since week 1. Because prior to that, he didn't score a receiving touchdown until in Europe. So in Europe, he scored 2, but then that was week 6. They ain't score all the way until 2 weeks ago. So that's kind of wild. So fun.
And then he had that one end around touchdown.
He had a rushing touchdown. Yeah,
he had the rushing touchdown in America. He had the 2 it's been a weird season for him, but man, he's clicking right now and he is looking good. All right, question from our friend Abe here. Are you willing to drop Antonio Brown on a first place team? We talked about Antonio Brown a little bit earlier. I'm not willing to drop him. I'm actually saying that if he is available, you should go out and pick him up right now. So we've seen his upside. I mean, this guy puts up pretty much wide receiver numbers when he is healthy in Tampa Bay. So I'm not willing to drop him. Troy, what are you doing with Antonio Brown? Would you be willing to drop him at this point?
If you're in first place, right? So kind of what we're talking about. So unless there's some high upside handcuff on waivers, Antonio Brown provides such a huge advantage, and his suspension, like he might be available for you. I think if I'm getting the timeline right, like either the last 2 games of the playoffs, right? At least of the championship week, right? So if you make the championship, I believe he should be back by then. So having that, and again, we saw when he was in the lineup, how he was the favorite target, right? I'm not saying he's going to go back to just being the number 1 target, but he's in that offense. We've seen him in his upside. So I don't think you need to force to drop him unless, again, there's very few even handcuffs because you're in the first place team. So clearly you have a stellar lineup, right? So you don't need to really make that many moves. So it would have to be, I'm trying to think, like I know Alexander Madison isn't available, but there's not many guys, even handcuffs, that I would want over someone like Antonio Brown who could be a league winner for you.
And that's what I'm trying to think is like, I can't imagine any teams, unless you like just really, really lucked out with your drafting, there's almost no way that, putting Antonio Brown in as a wide receiver 3 or a flex isn't an upgrade from what you've got already. Yeah. I mean, you're putting in a guy that's, going to be projected for somewhere around, 18 to 20 points if he's healthy. So I'm not willing to drop Antonio Brown. Vic?
You guys are making me sad that we haven't been able to use him since like week 5 or 6.
Oh, that's the reason why I'm not in the playoffs in one league. So I'm really
logging out my bench everywhere.
Seriously, it's making me sad. I agree with everything y'all said, though. Wouldn't be
But
dropping him.
really, I mean, if we drafted Antonio Brown, we kind of should have expected some sort of weird shenanigans, right? Like we didn't expect like just a 17 game like quiet season from Antonio Brown. So
We almost
you know,
made it. We almost made it all the way to the end of the season without anything. And then, god dang.
We were just about to get him back for our fantasy runs.
So
and
close.
I mean,
flex on the
fake vaccination
competition.
thing, even before the fake vaccination card thing, though, he had what was like a minor foot injury that we thought was going to be like 1 or 2 weeks, and then we find out it's a 6-week injury, and then I mean, I feel like we kind of had this coming for trusting Antonio Brown, didn't we?
Killing me, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, my SFB team will welcome him back with open arms if he's able to make it. Next question comes from our friend Kevin DuBois_22 on Twitter, and he is asking, who do you trust more down the stretch, Mike Williams or Hunter Renfrow? Just imagine this is week 3 and we were asking this question, how funny it would be, but man, how the mighty have fallen. Mike Williams in the Hunter Renfrow tier. Vic, start us off here. Who do you trust more, Mike Williams or Hunter Renfrow?
You're slandering Hunter Renfrow a little bit. He's become Carr's favorite target more than Darren Waller. Wide receiver 13 overall since week 8. He's crushing it. So this is just a similar argument to earlier I would make with the target volume that we were talking about with Jaylen Waddle. Hunter Renfrow is getting 8 targets per game since week 9. They had their bye in week 8. And Mike Williams is averaging 5 or 6 per game. He's just so much more boom or bust. So Renfrow has a very safe floor. And he also has a great ceiling. We saw that last week. He had a fantastic game, albeit without Darren Waller in the lineup. But you still could rely on him when Waller was there. I want to say Renfrow, but if you need that, playoffs, Mike Williams has some good matchups. This is really, really close, but I'm taking Renfrow for the safer play.
I agree.
Cool.
Troy.
Give me the accountant, Hunter Renfrow, man. Give me the accountant. Nah, he's just for all the reasons that you said. But he's had over 100 yards the past 2 weeks. His target share is ridiculous. Like Vic already mentioned, he's been getting average about 8 targets for the past few weeks. It's just, again, he's just too involved. And again, one thing about fantasy football that I love to see, that we all love to see, is consistency, reliability. Hunter Renfrow has given us that. Mike Williams, unfortunately, has not provided that to us. So give me Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah. All right. 3 for 3, stamp of approval. We are all team Hunter Renfrow on this one. We got 2 questions left, and then we are going to go to the chat. Both of these questions are going to go by pretty quickly because they're things that we have already talked about a little bit earlier on in the show. Just want to remind you, I do see that there are a bunch of viewers right now on Twitter. For whatever reason, we still cannot see comments coming in from Twitter. So you got a few minutes to hop over to the Football Guys YouTube page, youtube.com/footballguys. We are seeing all of those chats coming through on YouTube. So join us in the chat there. Drop your questions. We're going to get to them in just a few minutes. Last 2 questions. First one comes in from Richard Johnson, and Richard Johnson is asking us, I'm thinking about streaming Tua in week 15 in playoff round 1 versus the Jets over Russell Wilson versus the Rams. What do you think? I see everybody nodding. I see Troy with a little smirk on his face. You can't say Tua without seeing those corners turning up on the mouth. Troy, talk to us about Tua. I know that you're going with Tua here. Tell us why we should be starting Tua this week.
I mean, damn right I'm going to go with Tua, man. Okay, and again, not just a homer. He's just been, ever since he's come back from injury in week 6, he's been balling out. Again, like he's been throwing consistent touchdowns. I think that was one thing last year that he wasn't always doing. So like he's thrown at least 1 touchdown in every single game that he's played since he's come back, except for week 8. But last week, 2 touchdowns. The week before, 1 touchdown. Week before that, 2 touchdowns. Week 7, 4 touchdowns. Again, he's been consistent. He has been very consistent. And look,
Troy, I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to point out the one game where he didn't have a touchdown was that game where Jacoby Brissett got the start. And
sorry, I forgot to mention that second half.
Every game he started, he's thrown a touchdown.
You're right. No, 100%. Thank you for correcting me on that. I almost forgot. But he's been absolutely consistent. And just like we were talking about all the Jaylen Waddle hype, right? Him and Jaylen Waddle have found that connection. Devontae Parker is back in the lineup, and Devontae Parker looked good. Look, I'm sorry. When Devontae Parker plays, he's a contributing asset to the team. And again, we already talked about earlier in the show Russell Wilson's inconsistencies, his struggles. So, and obviously the matchup. At the end of the day, the matchup. Someone gets the Jets, Russ gets the Rams.
You play him.
That's at the end of the day. There's nothing else to talk about. Give me Tua.
Now we talked about this a little bit earlier on the show a while back, but it was kind of weird the way that Brian Flores was like benching him, taking him off the bench, punishing him, making up injuries. Like it was a really weird developmental plan. But what I found really interesting is since that game where he came back in, where Jacoby Brissett got the start because Tua was injured, and then Tua came in at halftime and looked pretty solid to close out that game. Since the next game, over those last 3 weeks where he's been the starter, he's the QB7 overall in fantasy football. I mean, he's just getting it done. And on top of being the QB7, he is completing 80% of his passes.
Nuts.
80%. That is bonkers. So
put some respect on his name.
Vic, do you have anything to add to this? I think we're all going Tua here.
Nah,
Did we cover it?
Y'all covered it.
All
very
right.
Well.
Last question, and then we will get to the chat. Patrick C is asking us, and Troy, I know your answer because you talked about this earlier. Which Green Bay Packers receiver do you trust more that is not named Davante Adams?
It's MVS. It's MVS. And don't get me wrong, Cobb is, for whatever reason, Aaron Rodgers likes to target Randall Cobb in the end zone. So I'll give him a little bit of credit. But MVS is the one who obviously has the most upside. Give me MVS in this one.
Yeah. I'm going MVS as well. I wish I could make an argument for Alan Lazard. I really like him, but they just can't seem to get him consistently involved.
Pour one out.
Troy or Vic, talk to us a little bit about the Packers wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Cobb here. MVS has the upside, and Troy almost got me with his argument earlier. They were all really, really good points. He's only had one boom game of 18 PPR points. So if Cobb is healthy, I'm going him here over the last 6 games. Now, this isn't great because Davante Adams gets all the production, but over the last 6 games, 4 targets a game, 2 of the 6, he was over 13 PPR points. So the floor is really, really low, which is why it's close because if Troy makes really good arguments for MVS, he's got that boom potential, which is what we all want in the playoffs, right? But then he could also have 3 points. So that's a little bit scary. I'm going to go with none if I really had to select. But if you make me...
That's not the question.
If you make me, I guess Cobb.
And, for the last 3 or 4 years, that's always been the question, like, who is the Packers wide receiver too? Well, they do have a wide receiver too. It's Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is the wide receiver too. Like Davante Adams is the number 1 target. Aaron Jones is the number 2. So we've seen over the last couple of weeks, MVS getting 9 and 10 targets. But I think a lot of that had to do with Aaron Jones being limited or just being completely inactive a couple of weeks ago. I think now that Aaron Jones is healthy and 100% back, there isn't a receiver that I trust there. I mean, Davante Adams is your bona fide wide receiver 1, and then you can expect another, 8 targets or so to go Aaron Jones's way. But MVS, Lazard, Cobb, those guys are all dart throws with floors that are literally 0. So I don't feel good about any of those guys. But anyway, before we get into the chat here, I already see those questions coming in. I am excited to answer those. Troy, let everybody know why they need to sign up for the Football Guys Daily email update.
Of course. Well, y'all need to sign up for the Football Guys Daily email update. If you haven't already, every day Joe Bryant will bring you all the latest from Football Guys, news, transactions, rumors, all the articles, all the shows from the Football Guys staff. So make sure you sign up today.
There you go. Make sure you do that if you haven't. Now let's go ahead and go right in. First question here comes from Abe. Where is Dave's stash? Thank you guys for putting up with that for the last month, but November is over, which means the Movember thing is as well. So back to the beard for me. But got a question here from Steve F. I picked up the Seattle defense for week 16 and 17. Should Jamal Adams being out for the season change them as an option? I also have Green Bay. Philadelphia is on waivers. Losing Jamal Adams is big.
It's huge. Yeah.
I would not mind trying to pivot personally because again, I don't think they're that great of a defense anyway, and you lose pretty much, I guess, arguably your best piece. So I would like Philly let me down last week. I'm really mad at them, but for most of the season, they've been a solid defense.
I like Green Bay. We just talked about them earlier.
And Green Bay.
Green Bay plays Chicago, and no offense, Dave. Fields is starting again. I would have rather Dalton start for the Green Bay defense, but
I'm
still
pretty sure
not a
Fields
bad
is still
play.
leaving the league in fumbles, despite only
Look, like,
having
that's what I'm saying. Like, I actually kind of like that matchup. Look, Fields is gonna have a bright future, but he ain't there yet. he gonna get sacked. He gonna
And
fumble.
you know what happens, man? When it gets cold too, it's harder to hold onto that ball. They got a game in Lambeau this
I don't know,
weekend.
be
Yeah,
Ooh,
it
honey.
pains me to say, but Green Bay is a very, very nice play this weekend. So, yeah, I think that you got to temper expectations for the Seattle defense without Jamal Adams. That's a huge hit to that defense, which already wasn't really that great. So, Philadelphia, we talked about this a little bit. Washington is definitely heating up. They're not the same team that they were earlier in the season, but I do like to play against Washington, and Philadelphia gets to
Same.
play against Washington 2 of the next 4 weeks. So I do think that that's a pretty good pickup. Definitely, we talked about this last week, talking about it again this week. Go ahead and pick up the Eagles if they are still available.
Washington scored 17 points in their last 2 games. So they're winning, but it's just kind of ugly and gross. So
And it was the same thing last year. They made the playoffs. They were a good team. They were winning games, but it was through their defense and their run game. And now we see it again. Defense is getting stronger. Their defensive line is getting more pressure. And your boy
Gibby's getting gibbier. Yeah,
Yep.
we know. We see it.
Getting gibbier. And hashtag analysis.
Next question comes in from Zach from Buffalo. How should I feel about Dontrell Hilliard? Big pickup, decent week, then a bye. Feels like he is worth a start against Jacksonville. You know, we
talk
talk so
lot
much.
about this.
We talk about all
in the
these, like
chat.
we just talk so much. I know what your takes are on this, and I know that we're all going to have very strong opinions on this, and they're not going to align. Troy,
Dave,
start
you
us
should
off.
start. Oh, I was gonna say.
Fine. I'll
Here's
start.
the thing.
I don't like Hilliard at all. I don't. And I'm sorry. I think that he is the pass catching back, and I think that he saw a big workload 2 weeks ago before the bye because Jeremy McNichols was inactive. I think with Jeremy McNichols there, he immediately steps back into that role as the third down back. I think Donta Foreman has shown to be the better runner, so I think the early down work goes to Deonta Foreman. I think the passing down work goes to Jeremy McNichols. And I think Dontrell Hilliard, unfortunately, is kind of the odd man out here. I don't like him at all. I think he's like a pure desperation play.
So here's the thing, right? So obviously, the matchup against Jacksonville is very, very enticing. But it's Jeremy McNichols, some superstar, bona fide lock to just waltz in and get his job back. So that's one thing we got to talk about here, right? Obviously, he's the veteran. He's the one that was started. And then they brought Hilliard in, and he's performed very admirably for the past couple of weeks. So maybe they just want to ride with the hot hand, right? He's looked good, and maybe Jeremy McNichols, maybe he's gonna get in third downs, but how much? And also, game script is gonna play a factor too, right? We're assuming that, and then Jacksonville's defense, I guess, is played better overall, but I'm assuming the Tennessee Titans are going to win this game. So I believe that is going to play a factor. And okay, Jeremy McNichols, you're coming off injury and you're the third down back. All right, get comfortable on the sideline. We shouldn't really need you. Okay, so that's why.
Yeah,
I think he's a fun.
That's why I'm projecting a Deonta Foreman game. I think this is going to be a game where they're going to
he's
command the
been
lead.
okay, but I put my faith in him a couple of weeks ago. He hasn't done much for me. He's been okay. He's been fine. But he needs to see the end zone. That's the problem with Deonta Foreman. If he doesn't see the end zone, ugh, gross. But
let's be honest. I mean, what we're looking at here is a 3-headed committee, and this isn't the Baltimore Ravens. This isn't the San Francisco 49ers. This is the Tennessee Titans, who have struggled lately. So, I mean, really, we're all planting a flag here, but do we feel confident about any of these guys?
You can't say you feel confident.
I wasn't saying we're not planting flags here. I'm not saying he's gonna be RB1, RB2 or anything. I think he's just a fine flex. He's a flex.
Fine
play.
flex. Yeah,
he's a flex.
I agree.
That's it.
All right.
The landscape is
McNichols
bad.
is going to be the odd man out, huh?
I don't think I already said this to you, Dave. McNichols ain't doing nothing. I'm gonna say it again. I don't think he's gonna.
If he has a great game, y'all can at me till the cows come home.
Yeah,
Jeremy McNichols, but
I will shotgun a white claw if McNichols has over 10 PPR points. How about that?
Y'all can add us.
Right.
If he has a good game, please let me know. Tell me. Roast me all you want. Jeremy McNichols, if he just balls out, please at me.
All right. Thanks for the great question, Zach from Buffalo. That sparked a good conversation there that I knew we weren't going to agree on. I hope we helped you. We probably didn't, but we at least had a good conversation there. Kevin S. Dropping a comment here when we were talking about the Chargers a little bit. Jared Cook week versus Los Angeles. And, we talked about Jaylen Guyton a little bit. We talked about Josh Palmer. But I want to point out that Jared Cook is leading the tight end core in snaps out of the slot. So if Keenan Allen or Mike Williams are unable to play, I do really, really like Jared Cook as a tight end this week. I think that, some of the other guys there, Trey McKitty and Donald Parham, I think that they are more suited to play inline tight end. And we could see Jared Cook just kind of stepping into a receiver role and possibly playing 100% of his snaps out of the slot. So like that call out a lot, Kevin, and I agree with you. Abe is adding here, Elijah Moore leads the league in touchdowns the last 8 weeks, plus a lot of yards. No Corey Davis bumps him up. He had to, when we were talking about Jaylen Waddle and Elijah Moore, he had to make an argument.
Number 2, Dave. Dave's the one who put him at number 3 when we were talking about him.
D. Higgins,
we didn't disrespect you, Abe. Just remember who disrespected you.
All right. And then Kevin again, he has a good question for us here. Green Bay or Los Angeles Rams backfield. What are we doing with these running backs? Sony Michel or Darrell Henderson, AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones? Are these guys flex plays? Let's break these down one at a time. And let's start with Green Bay, because this was Aaron Jones. He was getting drafted as an RB1. AJ Dillon has played out of his mind the last few weeks. I tweeted out today that I'm looking at Aaron Jones as more of an RB2. I've kind of got AJ Dillon as a high-end RB3. I think that they're slowly getting closer. How are you guys feeling about that Green Bay backfield heading into this week?
Vicky, go.
I'm with you, Dave. It's definitely feeling a little bit closer, but I don't know if that had anything to do with that, the Jones injury, which we hit on earlier. I'm hoping that he's fully healthy now and ready to go, and we see kind of that split that we saw in the beginning of the season versus what we've seen before. I hope that as a fantasy manager, and I don't think that's what's going to happen. I still think Jones is the one you want to play. I still think he's going to get majority of the pass catching work, as we already hit on earlier too, but it's definitely closer than we think. I'd be fine still flexing Dillon, honestly.
Yeah, I think they're both flex plays, and call me crazy, I think that AJ Dillon might actually have the higher floor of the two. I think that Aaron Jones has a much higher ceiling because he's still the preferred red zone guy, goal line guy. He still gets catches out of the backfield. But it wouldn't surprise me if going forward we just see like 10 to 15 carries for AJ Dillon every single week, while Jones gets used more as that scat back, line him up in the slot, run some wheel routes out of the backfield. I think that's kind of what we're going to see going forward. Like AJ Dillon isn't some guy that just came out of nowhere. He was a second-round pick that played very well as a rookie, and they were confident enough in him to let Jamal Williams walk. So I think that they really like AJ Dillon. And right now, from almost every metric standpoint, whether it's yards per carry, yards per reception, catch rate, you look at everything, AJ Dillon is just playing better than Aaron Jones right now.
Oh, so it hurts.
One, I completely agree with everything you said. One thing I don't understand, and you made the point, Dave, about how Aaron Jones is the preferred goal line back, which makes no dang sense because AJ Dillon's a truck. So you should be just using him anytime there's a short yard situation. You should be using AJ Dillon no matter what. But again, I love Aaron Jones, but I just had to say that. I don't really have anything additional to add.
So I think a reason for that, because I agree with you. Like, you'd think that if you're just going to hand the ball right up the middle, yeah, you want to give the ball to AJ Dillon's hand, 240 pounds or whatever. But Aaron Jones is not only a very good pass blocker, but they like to throw the ball. We saw this last year where they'd be at the 1 yard line and they'd throw the ball 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
And I think having Aaron Jones there, he just opens up the field so much more. Having him be able to run routes out of the backfield just gives them so much more flexibility. And and it's not like other teams, like, where we saw it last week with that attempt to win the game where Lamar Jackson was hyper focused on Mark Andrews. That's not what Aaron Rodgers does. He will take the snap directly in the shotgun and he'll go through his progression. So he'll look at Devontae Adams, he'll look at the tight end, he'll look at Aaron Jones. So I think that that's why they like doing that, just because it gives them a little bit more flexibility at the goal line. Right now, Aaron Jones is still the preferred goal line back, and I don't expect that to change for that reason. But let's talk about the Rams backfield. This one, we saw comments from Sean McVay yesterday saying we are a better team when we can get Darrell Henderson going. So that kind of
Wow,
seems like
that's
a
so
vote of confidence
rude.
for him. Very rude to Sony Michel, right? But I mean, what do you guys think? Is Sony Michel somebody that's still going to be a decent flex play going forward, or is he just back to the bench unless Henderson gets hurt?
I mean, it's
I don't
all
think
about
so.
the health of Henderson. Henderson, and we got monitor the practice reports, right? So we got monitor all the way till Friday. If he's like full practice, ready to go, then I'm gonna be very nervous about playing Sony. And like you're gonna need Sony to score a touchdown in that particular case. But if he's banged up, if he's limited all week, then I'm gonna feel more confident about playing Sony. So keep looking at the practice reports. Friday practice report is going to be very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, completely agree.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you summed that one up pretty well there, Troy. So the last question we got in the chat, unless something pops up while we are talking about this, comes again from Steve F. And he is saying, half-point PPR, should I go Jerry, Judy, or Odell Beckham? Troy, who would you go with in this situation, Judy or Beckham?
Give me Beckham. So it's kind of give me Beckham because I feel like they've been getting him in the end zone, right? So they've been targeting him in the end zone, and I like that upside. And he did have a game with 10 targets. He had a couple games with, mediocre, I guess, target share, but overall, they're making it a priority to try to get him in, to target him in the end zone. So I do like that. I like the offense much better. So give me Beckham.
This is a really interesting question. I mean, Judy gets Detroit this week, but the Denver offense is just much more putrid than we expected it to be. I thought you guys probably too thought Bridgewater was going to be a lot better for these receivers. We talked about it all off season, and it's been disappointing. I think they're closer than we think, but I'm with you, Troy, on Odell having the higher upside of getting into the end zone.
Yeah, I mean, Odell's got touchdowns in back-to-back weeks now. I mean, he has done what we expected. Why he's still being rated as like a wide receiver 3, I don't really get. He stepped right into the Robert Woods role, and he's playing that role pretty well. It seems like he and Matt Stafford are getting more and more comfortable. So, yeah, I'm going Beckham pretty easily between these two.
I'd take Van Jefferson over them both.
No, you wouldn't.
Van's been he's been involved.
Balling.
I don't know. It's hard for me to say over Beckham. They're just they're kind of neck and neck. They're right there, but give me Odell. This is
Odell Beckham, 2 targets, 28 yards. Excuse me, 2 receptions, 28 yards, 1 touchdown. Last week, Van Jefferson.
Yeah, but he revived himself after that. You missed that. He revived himself in the end zone, and now he's coming back. You saw his touchdown celebration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, whatever. But Van Jefferson also has touchdowns in back-to-back weeks, y'all.
He does.
And more yardage. Just saying.
He does.
Okay.
All right. It sounded spicy at the time, but you convinced me. Van Jefferson has been solid. I've been playing him in a lot of leagues, and I feel like I just keep getting lucky. But maybe he is just,
I know. Watch him have a dud this week.
Out. All right, next question comes in from Abe. Chuba Hubbard versus Atlanta or Josh Jacobs versus Kansas City? This is a no-brainer for me. Josh Jacobs.
He's been getting targets, which is crazy. He's finally getting targets for like the first time in his career.
I read today that Josh Jacobs has only had 1 game where he has scored less than 10 PPR points all season.
Yeah, and we all just crapped on him throughout the entire offseason.
I was all in on Josh Jacobs.
There's been a lot of change.
I was all in on Josh Jacobs this offseason. All I was saying is, like, listen, even if he doesn't live up to what he's done in the past, I thought it was ludicrous that we were dropping him into the 5th and 6th round. I mean, this is a guy that we know is going to see 200 carries at a minimum. And then I didn't expect the pass catching work, but that's a nice little cherry on top. So, yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs, he's putting up solid numbers, and he was going in the 5th and 6th round this year. It is crazy to me that this guy has been an RB1 in back-to-back seasons, and then nobody wanted him this year for whatever reason.
He had his best game of the season last week, and Kenyon Drake's out for the season. So.
Yeah. And, yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. Kenyon Drake, yeah. So with him gone, that's why he's getting those extra targets now. I like it. All right, we got another question here from Zach from Buffalo. If Antonio Williams gets activated from the practice squad, pick him up if you have a spot. He tweeted God with a picture of him in a Bills uniform after the Monday Night Football game. Correct me if I'm
Oh,
wrong, but didn't Antonio Williams have the most points per
points per
game last
game.
year? In his one start, he put up like
Yep.
28 points.
It was
All right.
wild. The Bills are going to be grasping at whatever they can to win these next couple of weeks. So I wouldn't be shocked if he's activated.
Well, we got
Don't
another
pick him
question
up,
here.
though.
I don't know if this is a question, but Abe is asking us, play Juwan Johnson everywhere this week?
Why?
Isn't he hurt?
No,
I don't even know what's going
I
on.
know
That's
Troutman's
a
on
name I haven't
IR.
heard since before week 1.
Well, he got like barely any targets last week. No, like I don't really want any pass catchers from Taysom Hill. And also, his finger obviously thinking, but he threw 4 interceptions. He did not look good. Just give me Taysom Hill. I just want to see him run, and that's all. I don't really want to see him passing.
I'm looking right now. Juwan Johnson has seen exactly 1 or 3 targets in every single game this season. No more, no
That's
less.
disgusting. Get
Cool.
this off the screen.
Awesome.
Stop talking about it.
All right. Well, before we sign off here, I just want to, first of all, thank everybody for watching another episode of the Mailbag Show. It has been a pleasure getting to do the show with you guys every single week. Crazy that we're getting close to the end of the season here, but, just being able to help you guys out, the Football Guys members audience has been an absolute pleasure, and we are very grateful to be able to do that. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube page at youtube.com/footballguys if you have not already. You can catch us here every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. You can submit all of your questions to mailbag@footballguys.com. Be sure to tune in live on YouTube so we can see those comments and answer your questions live on air. But thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next week.